recording now, and it's funny. I'll go back and listen to my videos and watch them a little bit just to make sure that everything's there. And I noticed on the last few that it takes about 10 minutes into the video for my voice to catch up with my mouth. And it's like, oh, I'm making a Chinese movie. Yeah. So, all right. Well, it's good to be back here at Prudes Creek, back in the house of the Lord, and finally getting that rain we need to knock all that pollen out. Whew. So we're still in the Psalms. We're looking at Psalm 35 today. And started preparing for getting into the book of Isaiah soon. So hopefully we'll be able to do that after Easter. And what's going on there? That's weird. Anyways. Yeah, so hopefully after Easter we'll be able to get into the book of Isaiah. A lot of really great, neat stuff in there. I'm really looking forward to that Bible study and going through on that series. But we're still talking about King David here. And this one is actually of David. It tells you right there at the top. So we know that David wrote this one. 35. 3-5. Last week we did 34. Taste and see that the Lord is good. And one of the things I've been meaning to do at some point, I know they get the titles in here from some verse within the psalm, but it almost looks like these titles kind of have, if you were to take all the titles of all the psalms together, you could actually make a whole nother psalm in and of itself. And that's going to be an interesting thing to look at some point. But we've got 3 years digging through the Psalms, maybe 3.5, depending on how you treat 119. But we haven't gotten that far yet. We're in Psalm 35. Great is the Lord. And the wonderful thing about Psalms, it gives us, and this is one of the reasons I got into studying the Psalms and teaching about the Psalms, is it's a way to pray. It helps us to see the things that David and the other psalmists went through and how they addressed God, how they dealt with their problems, how they, pour it out to God, right? And then, but what's great about these Psalms, most of them, vast majority of them, is when you do all, and you're done with all your issues, then there's but we know that God is great, right? We know that God is good. And no matter what our problems and our troubles are, God's always better and stronger, and God's capable of dealing with it if we'll turn to Him. So that's a really good thing about going through the Psalms. And there's some other stuff you can look at, maybe how you come out of depression and deal with certain emotions and things of that nature if you want to really get deeper into it. So it's a very resourceful thing. It's a great thing to have to reference. And as I've said before, there's prophecy throughout it in different places, but it's good stuff to go through, and it really helps give you insight into King David and what he dealt with. And this one's no different. He's got people that don't want him to be in power. He's got people that want to challenge him and question him, and they want to give him problems. So we're going to see how he deals with that. Starting off verse 1, Psalm 35. Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and rise for my help. Draw the spear and javelin against my pursuers. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Let them be put to shame and dishonor who seek after my life. Let them be turned back and disappointed who devise evil against me. Let them be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away. Let their way be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. For without cause they hid their net for me. Without cause they dug a pit for my life. Let destruction come upon him when he does not know it. and let the net that he hid ensnare him. Let him fall into it, to his destruction. Verse 9, then my soul will rejoice in the Lord, exulting in his salvation. All my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you, delivering the poor from him who is too strong for him, the poor and needy from him who robs him. Malicious witnesses rise up. They ask me of things that I do not know. They repay me evil for good. My soul is bereft. But I, when they were sick, I wore sackcloth. I afflicted myself with fasting. I prayed with head bowed on my chest. I went about as though I grieved for my friend or my brother, as one who laments his mother. I bowed down in mourning. But at my stumbling they rejoiced and gathered. They gathered together against me. Wretches whom I did not know tore at me without ceasing. Like profane mockers at a feast, they gnash at me with their teeth. How long, O Lord, will you look on? Rescue me from their destruction, my precious life from the lions. I will thank you in the great congregation. In the mighty throng I will praise you. Verse 19, let not those rejoice over me who are wrongfully my foes, and let not those wink the eye who hate me without cause. For they do not speak peace, but against those who are quiet in the land. They devise words of deceit. They open wide their mouths against me. They say, aha, aha. Our eyes have seen it. You have seen, O Lord, be not silent. O Lord, be not far from me. Awake and rouse yourself for my vindication, for my cause, my God and my Lord. Vindicate me, O Lord, my God, according to your righteousness, and let them not rejoice over me. Let them not say in their hearts, aha, our heart's desire. Let them not say, we have swallowed him up. Let them be put to shame and disappointed altogether who rejoice at my calamity. Let them be clothed with shame and dishonor who magnify themselves against me. Let those who delight in my righteousness shout for joy and be glad and say evermore, great is the Lord, who delights in the welfare of his servant. Then my tongue shall tell of your righteousness and of your praise all the day long. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this word, dear Lord. We thank you for David pouring his heart out to you, dear Lord, for us to see how it is we should deal with these situations, dear Lord, just how it is we should approach you and where our heart should be. We just thank you for the wisdom here, dear Lord, and we just thank you for the poetic words. And I just pray that they would speak to our hearts, dear Lord. I would ask that you would be with those not here in church, dear Lord, that you would touch their hearts and convict them to bring them back into fellowship with you and with other believers, dear Lord. Help us to make wise decisions in this church as we do our best to further your kingdom, dear Lord. And we just ask that you would be with us in this service, that our hearts and our minds be open to you. We ask for all this in Jesus' precious name. So it's almost a juxtaposition. She doesn't like that word. but it is, though. Here's David. He's got people coming against him, and he wants God to smite him. He wants God, and we see that. I've used the word imprecatory before. That's the fancy word for Psalms that call for people's destruction or demise, defeat at the very least. And we need to keep in mind that, and this is something we have lost in our modern warfare. Back then, when you went to war, you killed everybody. And I mean everybody. And we see that in the Old Testament. God says, kill them all. I mean, all the peoples, animals, the whole kit and caboodle, kill everybody. And we scratch our head and we wonder. And I know Sun Tzu's not anywhere in the Bible, but one of the greatest generals to ever live in the history of mankind wrote a massive book on warfare, and it tells you defeat your enemies, kill them, because what happens is if they survive, they come back for revenge. If their children survive, their children grow up and they come after you for revenge. There's a point to that. And I'm not saying that, and David is not specifically calling for everybody down the line to be destroyed, but he wanted his enemies to be defeated. Now, David is king of Israel. He's God's anointed. And if they're challenging him, they're challenging God for the most part, especially when David was righteous, when he was correct, and when he was repentant, and when he was right with God and doing things by and for and of God, then absolutely defeat those enemies, because they're getting in the way of God doing his will. And of course, today, as I said, that juxtaposition, today Christ would tell us to love our enemies and to pray for our enemies and to do good to our enemies, with the implication that it's going to be like putting hot ashes on their head. Your kindness in exchange for their evil should convict them and make them feel bad. Now, clearly not everybody's like that, but in this case, David is dealing with people who really, it kind of comes across like we meet these kind of people all the time who just want to be jerks to be jerks. And there's people that don't want David to succeed for no other reason. It's not that they hate God, or they just want to be jerks. And they have no reason to hate David. They have no reason. He's not done anything to them, but yet they want to see his downfall. And what should be clear in this is there's nothing wrong with us going to God when our frustration, because I kind of pick up on some frustration from David here that he's dealing with these enemies. And, for him come on, God, let's deal with these people, please. They've got no reason. If I were to go out and punch somebody in the face and they turn around and punch me back, I shouldn't get mad at them, right? And so had David done something to these individuals, had he sinned against them to cause them to hate him, then he would have no ground to stand on. But as it is, as he says in the psalm, he's done nothing wrong. He's not done anything to these people. They just, for some strange reason, they want to see him fail. And so there's nothing wrong with go to God with our frustrations and to let this all out to God. And it's not wrong to ask that question. When are you going to do something about this? Provided we're right with God. And it's it's not wrong at all for us to cry out to God to help talk through and work through these issues and the emotions. And like I said, beginning of this, bring us back to that point of fully trusting God and say, okay, it's in your hands now, you handle it. Of course, then we have to step back and actually let him do that. But when you look at the first three verses there, and the people who want to fight against David, and he's asking God to take up shield and buckler, spear and javelin. Those were common things back then, and spear and javelin are not quite the same thing. A javelin is just a long pointy stick, very sharp. Might even have a metal end on it, but the spear has like some sort of triangle shape, so it's an extra wider piece, can do more damage. Although a javelin is designed to be thrown from a greater distance. If you ever watch Olympic style stuff, when I was in middle school, I threw javelin one summer. It's a very interesting thing, very different from anything else you throw, shot put, discus, all that. But a lot of that stuff came out of like military style weapons for what they did in their events. But anyways, so take up arms and go out and defeat enemies. You don't go out and pick a fight when you're unarmed. If you do, you're not real bright. So, but then verses 4-6, let them be put to shame and dishonor. And that's one of the things when you deal with enemies, when you deal with people who are coming after you, sometimes it's best to kind of step back from it and let them put all of their cards out there on the table, so to speak. I had an incident several years ago when I was working in a warehouse and had a guy accuse me of not being a good supervisor, and he wasn't even my boss. He was a fellow supervisor on another shift. And I show up for work, and he's there, and it's like, he's not supposed to be here for another several hours. And I sit down, and all these accusations are put against me. And when the whole meeting was done, I looked at my boss and I said, my shift, my guys, our work speaks for itself. We do more than anybody else in here, and we do this properly and that properly. And I said, that's all I have to say about that. Next day, boss comes to me, says, man, I want to apologize. He said, everything he accused you of doing, we caught him doing the very next day. And I only say that to say this, that guy came similar to David here. There was no reason for that guy to come against me. But I had done things right because my shift was performing properly and everything was done right enough that I could stand back and say with integrity that, we're not doing anything wrong. But the guy who attacked me ended up looking bad. And so I kind of understand some of this. So that guy was dishonored when everybody realized, what was going on with that. But I like that verse 5, let them be like chaff before the wind. When you're sorting out, when you're winnowing the wheat, and you're just trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, right? That empty husk that's over the actual grain of wheat. And as you get you have like a pan of some kind, and you're flipping it in the wind, and the wind is blowing the chaff away because it's so much lighter. And chaff is also something in modern day. Aircraft will launch chaff behind it to distract missiles and different things like that to protect them, and that gets destroyed instead of you. Either way, chaff gets blown away and usually burn up or put out to waste, right? So let our enemies be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away. So in other words, God, you come and you deal with it. You send your people and deal with the issue, right? So he's asking for God to help. Verse 8, let destruction come upon him when he does not know it, and let the net that he hid ensnare him, let him fall into it to his destruction. It's if you can catch on these things, and you're wise enough to kind of let it play out, more often than not, the other person's going to get caught up in their own machinations, as we would say. And that's what David's saying. Hey, God, come on. Let them further incriminate themselves before you. If nothing else, if nothing happens with mankind, and this is not, we shouldn't be pacifists. I don't believe in that. I think we should defend ourselves for sure when we know we absolutely must defend ourselves. But for the average person out there, again, not everything requires a response. And sometimes the more you let a person speak or accuse, they end up showing their hands, and they end up looking worse and more foolish than anybody else. And so being able to stay calm in those situations, let them further incriminate. That's what David's saying here. Let my enemies incriminate themselves further against you, because if they're sinning against David, especially for no cause, for no reason, that's a sin against the Lord. And if somebody comes at me with no cause, it's like a few weeks back when I said the woman accused me of being a bigot and a hypocrite, and I was the reason she left the church. There was no reason for her to say any of that to me. But you let her speak long enough, and she shows how foolish she really is, and just how much she needs God and forgiveness, and and it's. I hope she finds it at some point. I really do. I would love to see her restored, but don't fall into it, and don't let yourself be pushed into a situation you lose control of. That's the other side of this, is when everybody seems to come at you and rush at you, and people start throwing out accusations, it's real easy to just real quick fire back. So we have to have that wisdom, and we have to have the ability to step back and get the big picture. And that way we're not doing rash, judgmental things that would actually make it worse on us. And then all of a sudden now they actually have a reason. So don't give them the reason. They're doing it without cause. Don't actually give them a reason to even remotely try and justify it. So they can go, and just like he says here, aha, like it's kind of like, see, I told you so. Don't give them ammunition. Let them run at you with empty weapons. But verse 9, then my soul will rejoice in the Lord, exulting in his salvation. It is so important. It's like we say that we can share our testimonies, but ultimately it is God's testimony of his Son that brings us salvation. And in this case, David knows enough to say, I haven't done anything. God has done all of this, and God has saved me from my enemies. And certainly that's what Christ does for us. He saves us from our enemy, from two, really, ourselves and the devil. And so Christ saves us from our enemies, and it is his salvation. We can claim it. We can claim salvation because we believe in the Lord, but it's ultimately his to give and his to grant, because he could very easily just let you flounder and fail and be destroyed. But if we're right with the Lord, and we recognize him, and we let God go before us, and we let God deal with our enemies. And again, not to say if you're in imminent danger of death, defend yourself, certainly. But we're not always in that situation. Much as the world wants us to think that we're constantly in a state of panic. They want you in a state of panic all the time. And that's what your enemies will do. And when they come at you, when they accuse you, when they attack you, when they do all those things, they want you to panic, because then you misstep, you do the wrong things, you don't seek God, you go into that fight or flight mode, and instead of getting God to help you, you try to do it on your own. And that never works out. Or if it does, it makes it that much harder, as opposed to letting God handle things. But verse 10, all my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you, delivering the poor from him who is too strong for him, the poor and needy from him who robs him. And that's everything we do, everything we deal with day to day. Give God his glory and his honor. Acknowledge him, thank him, proclaim him. To just sit back and just let God do everything and then not tell anybody. We should be excited and be want to actually go out and tell people. Now we got to understand it, which is why you should find fellowship with other like believers, showing up to church or to Bible study, so that you can have a true biblical understanding of it. But it's when God does things, especially good things, and part of that for us, everything's known in hindsight. True blessings are known in hindsight. It's difficult in the middle of a situation to say this is a blessing, but when you can get a few days away from it and think about it and reflect on it, and as you're telling somebody, I was blessed by God and this is how he did it. In the moment, it might have been tough. It was probably really tough for David to sit back with some restraint and, I'm not going to go out and kill these people. I'm going to let God do it, or I'm not going to be the one to make them look stupid. Let them do that themselves, and then God can deal with their sin. But it's very easy for us to get caught up in the moment. And then the other side to it is keeping in mind that God himself is doing it and giving him the glory and the credit and the honor for it and everything else. But again, when you're able to talk to somebody and say, this is what God did for me, this is how God blessed me, and that's his testimony. It's through me. Yep. It's through you and your situation. But wherever it happens, if we let God do the work, God gets the credit, God gets the blessing, and more people will respond to that, eternally speaking. I mean, I can sit there and pound my chest and say how great I am that I handled whatever situation, and I might gather a crowd. But is that getting everybody to heaven? And then when real trouble truly does actually happen, and they look to me, and then I'm like, now there's nobody standing there. But God is always there. So when I'm gone, whatever point that is, God's there. You might have some of my videos, you might have some of my testimony, but ultimately it's his testimony. I mean, think about it. We're 6,000 years of recorded history in the Bible. We have a fraction. 40 authors over 4,000 years, 66 books in the Bible. This is but a fraction of what's happened on the earth. But it contains God's testimony, not ours, and it hasn't changed for us in 2,000 years. So we can rely on God's testimony. The people coming after us can rely on God's testimony far better and greater than they can rely on mine, or Billy Graham, or Charles Spurgeon, or D.L. Moody, or Pink, or Tozer, or, to pick somebody. We have some tremendous theologians that we can look back on, but ultimately they're all talking about who? They're talking about God. And it's really interesting because, and this is something we deal with a lot in the church, right? Verse 11, malicious witnesses rise up. They ask me of things I do not know. They repay me evil for good. My soul is bereft. But when they were sick, I wore sackcloth. I afflicted myself with fasting. I prayed with head bowed on my chest. We're going to do good things for people who are going to be ungrateful. And we're going to do good things for people who are going to come back and repay our good with their evil. It's going to happen. If it hadn't already, it definitely will in the future. There's always somebody out there who doesn't know how to receive a gift or a blessing. And it really, for a lot of us, that can lead us into a place where we choose not to help anybody anymore. If that's the way you're going to treat me, then I'm not even going to fool with you. I'm going to quit trying to help anybody because everybody's so ungrateful. But what's everybody's favorite kind of little saying now? But God. How many was there? 8+ billion people on the earth. We've been around for 6,000 years, give or take a few. So we're talking about how many billions of people. And then we don't know exactly when he's when the rapture is going to happen and the second coming and all that jazz. So, 20, 30, 40 billion people. How many of them ever said, "Thank you, God"? And, when you go through the Old Testament, when you go through Isaiah and you look at Isaiah and you start seeing the prophecies of when Israel's going to be dealt with and punished, and they're going to be dispersed, and when they come back, there's one point, I want to say around the time of Esther, there's only like 50,000 Jews. Out of millions of Jews, only 50,000 came back to Israel. And of course, there's millions of Jews today, but how many people, Jews, Gentile alike, how many God-fearing people, Christ-following, Messiah-following people are actually going to end up being in heaven? When you think about the billions and billions of people that have lived and died in our known history. So God deals with people all the time who are ungrateful. And yet he continues to bless ungrateful people. And you and I, we all have our moments. Hopefully they're very few. But we have our moments where we don't thank God or we don't thank him enough. And of course, for us, the greatest thing we can do, the greatest thing that David could ever do for the Lord, I think, was write these Psalms. When we're sitting here 4,000 years later reading 2,500 to almost not quite 3,000 years, about right. To read this now and to learn from it, be blessed from it today. When we finally get a chance to shake David's hand up in heaven, that's going to be really neat conversation. So we should thank God and remember that it's him and him alone that it can save us from these situations. Verse 22, you have seen, O Lord, be not silent. O Lord, be not far from me. Awake and rouse yourself for my vindication, for my cause, my God and my Lord. Vindicate me, O Lord, my God, according to your righteousness, and let them not rejoice over me. When we get into our trials and our troubles and our tribulations and our issues and everything else, it can feel like God's neglecting us because he's doing things on his timing, not ours. Sometimes it's immediate. Sometimes it takes time. But we have to remember and rely on God to do it his way and let him do it his way. When we start trying to put our way in the middle of it, that's when we really start having problems, right? And that's ultimately, because we're looking at the lens of things through eternity, looking through the lens of eternity. And the things that God does, he does for an eternity. We do them temporally. We do them for a short period of time here on earth. And my calamity is a brief moment. And maybe it's a lifetime here on earth. It's obviously not an eternity unless we do what? Unless we reject God. And then, so some of this judgment that David is calling for would solve him from his moments then. But we're not trying to establish Israel like he was. Well, God established it, but he was trying to stay in the will of God and make sure that Israel did well and grew and prospered by him being as righteous as he could be. But for us in our situations, we're dealing with short time. God's dealing in eternity, so our salvation is eternal. Our damnation is eternal as well. And they're opposite sides of the same coin. So when we're looking at things, what God has done by providing his son to die on the cross for our sins, that does defeat the devil for a short period of time here in our universe, but ultimately it lends itself to eternity, because what he's done by giving us eternal salvation. And so with so many people want justice now. A young friend of ours is struggling with, why did good things happen to bad people? Or why do bad things happen to good people? It's a question he asked. But that's for here on earth. And like I said, our trials and our troubles and our tribulations are temporary. When we put our faith and trust in the Lord like David did, it becomes an eternal blessing. Because God's dealing with eternity. We're dealing with a few hours or years. And that's tough, and it's difficult. I get it. Believe me, I get it. I'm a poor fat guy living in the woods. We struggle from paycheck to paycheck. Some of that's our own fault. Some of that's my fault. But God's always blessed us because we got a roof over our head. We got food to eat. We got cars to drive. One way or another, we're blessed. And the least we could do is to go out and tell people, at least I can do, is what I'm doing. So, but it's still, again, some days it's like, I just don't feel it, God. I just really don't feel like it. Couldn't imagine Jesus doing that. I couldn't, getting out there in the garden, God, I just don't feel like doing this today. No, I thank God Jesus didn't do that, right? How many humans, how many just regular folks would be like, yeah, I'm just not feeling it. Nope. Thank God that God did not do that. Thank God that Jesus did not do that. So put our faith and our trust in him. Let God be the one that deals with your enemies. But we have to put our faith and our trust in him for him to be able to do that. And when we do that, verse 27, in closing here, verse 27, let those who delight in my righteousness shout for joy and be glad and say evermore, great is the Lord who delights in the welfare of his servant. Then my tongue shall tell of your righteousness and of your praise all the day long. We should be living testimonies. When people look at us, they should be able to say, I want what you've got. And what I've got should be the Lord. You can have whatever fancy vehicle you want. You can have all the knickknacks and the toys and the big houses and all that jazz. None of that speaks of God. There's people that'll try to tell you that it does. But ultimately, that's all perishable stuff here on earth for a short time. You can't take any of that. There's no U-Hauls at the gravesite. There's not a single spot. There's no parking spots for U-Hauls up at the cemetery, is there? Can't take it with you. We came into this world naked. We're going to leave out of the world naked, and we're going to stand before God naked. And he's going to see us for everything we are and everything we have. And when he looks at us, he ought to be able to say, well done, my good and faithful servant, because our lives are living testimonies, just as David's life was a testimony unto God and his blessing. The promises of God that bring us Jesus through his bloodline. So when we go about our day-to-day lives, when we encounter our trials and our troubles, let God do the work for us. Give God the glory. And then make sure that we tell others about what God has done for us.